Is the human brain really the most complex object in the universe? It seems fine, right? I mean, it seems very human-centric, seems very egotistical to me to even consider something like this. But let's do it. Let's put on our strap on our ego boots and go stomping through the cosmos human style and kind of shaking things up. Why not? But back to this. So back in 2012, straight from the article, back in 2012, neuroscientist Christoph Cook wrote in his book Consciousness: Confessions of a Romantic Reductionist that the human brain is the, quote, most complex object in the known universe. Given that there are about 86 billion neurons in a brain connected up in ways that we are only beginning to unravel, this seems intuitive. But when I put it to David Wolpert in the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico, again, the article is linked in the description, created in the 1980s as a hub for the budding field of complexity science, he doesn't see it that way. He says, quote, "It's almost farcical to entertain that we are the most complex system in the universe," he says. "The question is actually wrong-headed." Yeah, I kind of agree, but it doesn't quite matter, because let's say that the concept might be possible. Okay, that let's say there's a whole lot of universe out there and a whole lot of nothing, a whole lot of stars and galaxies and all the rest of the stuff that we can kind of see, and in our barely beginning aspects of understanding what the cosmos actually is, we start to recognize, let's say again philosophically, that we're alone, that there's nothing out there, there's no life, it is the darkness, it is the void, it is just things smashing into each other, it's supermassive black holes, it's all the crazy stuff that we see through the James Webb Telescope. Well, but it's completely devoid of any other type of intelligence whatsoever. Now, of course, that would be incredibly creepy, as who said it? Was it Carl Sagan, I believe? There are two possibilities, and both are equally terrifying. Either we're alone in the universe, or we're not. And so, of course, let's take the binary aspect of this and say that maybe we are alone, okay? Just again, as a part of the thought experiment. But what does it mean when we're talking about the human mind as the most complex thing? I think it suddenly turns this upside down and into a space of, well, like I said, maybe the universe revolves around us. I mean, we turn into this really kind of egomaniacal sort of situation of, aha, humans rule the universe, the cosmos, the multiverse, whatever, right? Which seems ridiculous. As I said, very wrong-headed, as well said by David Wolpert at the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico. So anyway, it doesn't quite matter, because, like I said, this type of stuff is complex, and it's fun to think about and to consider where, of course, as we talk about often on Troubled Minds, where ideas come from, where these ideas are actually sort of built, but not just our ideas. Let's say ideas that we get from the muses, sort of downloads, things like this. We've talked about that often, but it does make me wonder about sort of that fractal nature of the mind itself, okay? Meaning this. So just a little bit more from this article, and we'll get back to this. So complexity isn't defined by components and their interconnections. He's talking about the brain here. It is the idea that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, something that complexity scientists call emergence. In this way, the human brain is more like an ant colony, creating elaborate underground cities without a blueprint or a leader, than a galactic web. Neurons and ants are both relatively simple units that somehow collectively give rise to sophisticated behavior. Soleil reckons, that's Richard Soleil at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, Spain, reckons that the human brain transcended its neurons owing to our unusual capacity for language. Quote, "From our lexicon, we can build virtually an infinite array of sentences," he says. "Combined with our memory, this allows us to foresee the future and even imagine alternative futures as well as the minds of others." Now we start to get complex, of course, because, again, thinking about the idea of the mind as, let's say, just a monolith, as being something that's just us, that's just a space, that's just you, it's nothing beyond that. We can't connect to them. We can only sort of imagine what's happening in other people's minds. We cannot read other people's minds. We can't do any of the rest of that. But we certainly can create sort of these alternate realities within ourselves, which of course goes back to the fractal idea of the larger and smaller and all the rest of this, and as it builds and grows and shrinks and all the rest, and infinite complexity in that capacity, okay? Well, so the idea becomes suddenly that it gets quite a bit more strange than this, because not only do we have this thing happening where we have the human brain, the really most complex object in the universe, there's this other article that just recently hit as well that's talking about, could our minds be bigger than even a multiverse? Again, the convex of the original question here. So which is it, right? Is the mind, the human mind, the actual just the epitome of the complex machine in the universe, or or is our mind, let's say, not just a small machine that we have adapted to and become, hugely proficient with? Instead, is it bigger than the multiverse itself, which, of course, I like to call the omniverse, which includes everything: the dream world, the astral realm, every single thing, every spiritual realm you can imagine, the far realm from Dungeons and Dragons, which we'll get to tonight. Lots of ways to consider this, lots of ways to look at it. And so that's where we start tonight. Just a couple ideas to kind of kick it out. So is the human brain really the most complex object in the universe? And love to hear your thoughts on that, if that seems ridiculous, or if it's maybe has some legs, at least philosophically. But then the next step is, could our minds be bigger even than a multiverse and beyond that? Now, again, so I'm calling this tonight Beyond the Mindscape, an elusive fractal beginning, because when you think about these fractals, large, small, all the rest, and even into the most smallest imaginable spaces and the most massive multiversal spaces, there seems to be in this chain something unbroken, okay? It is just part of the fractal itself. But what happens when you start to look at this and consider where this began, sort of the beginning of all of this, including, of course, the beginning of all ideas, including, of course, the beginning of, even philosophical concepts like we're talking about tonight, whether the human mind is the most complex object in the multiverse or the universe, and then beyond that, how big does it get? There's a lot here to consider, including, of course, let's say not just the materialist version of this, but what about us sharing mindscapes? Okay, now here's one of the theories that kind of came out of this as I was kicking this around, and it came late. I was struggling tonight, as you can tell. Maybe you can't, but I was totally struggling to try and figure some stuff out here. But these articles, interestingly, came up. This one February 21st, and this other one from February 28th of this year. So basically, again, we sort of have this circular sort of sync in the news cycles and different articles that are kind of pumping out this information at around the same time. Again, the very beginning of this is the human brain, the most complex object, but then, of course, could our minds be bigger than even a multiverse? Now, the multiverse part is fascinating as hell, because you start to consider that if we can imagine these things, however big the imagination can become, can we sort of generate it? Are we rendering reality in the cosmos in sort of this many worlds theory? It's constantly spinning off, maybe not from the cosmos itself, but let's say certainly from our minds and our sort of fractured perspectives of pretty much everything, whether it's through the dream realm or whether it's through sort of astral travel and this type of stuff, or remote viewing and some of these other psi effects we've talked about in the past. Is any of this really possible, basically? And then what does it look like when we start to extrapolate it out further and further and further, and talking about the beginnings and the endings of this actual fractal, this mindscape, as I'm calling this tonight? I don't know. Like I said, those answers are beyond me. But one of the theories that came to mind was this sort of neural multiverse theory, and as I described it there. So think of this. The idea that the individual human brains contain multitudes of parallel mental universes, each with its own unique set of experiences and perceptions, meaning that we're basically kind of spinning off these multiversal spaces continually that are maybe even encapsulated within themselves, and even fractals within fractals. But then that would, of course, mean that we're sharing some sort of space out there somewhere, or maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it's infinite space, and we're just kind of filling the void with, let's say nonsensical Kardashian propaganda because we're watching, trash TV down here on Earth. You know what I mean? Or whatever else kind of thoughts and ideas we have, maybe even spinning off from our dreams. But this sort of idea means that we are possibly sharing these spaces. Again, maybe shared dreams. We've talked about tandem dreaming in the past, or even, let's say, sharing not just this reality, but maybe we're sharing alternate realities with each other in some particular way, even let's say fractalized, meaning that as big as it gets, as small as it gets, and somewhere along that chain being a beginning somewhere, which, as you know me, when I think about these ideas, get a little which is funny, in this article they mention this something similar about the romantic idea of going beyond the human mind, and I do think when I start to think of this stuff and go extremely cosmic with the concepts, it is kind of romanticized a little bit. Kind of like I always joke with myself that I'm romanticized with beginnings and endings, because I think it's a very human thing. I think it's a very human aspect to think, if we're sort of locked in this fractal chain from biggest to smallest, that it's got to begin somewhere, doesn't it? It's got to end somewhere, doesn't it? Or is it again sort of the Ouroboros as the eating its snake eating its tail sort of situation? Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But the idea of whether there is a beginning and an end in that aspect is, to to me, endlessly fascinating, which is exactly the point of this tonight, and pretty much the point of a lot of troubled minds and the things we discuss. But anyway, so back to this. Now, this is a weird one. Now, what if our minds could be bigger than the multiverse itself? Now, check this out. So hold on. It takes a little while to explain here. So Okay. So what if? Let's see. No. Okay. All right. I'm not gonna. He makes a really great case, but I'm not going to read it because you have to kind of read it through straight through. Oh, here we go. I got an AI. Let's see if I can do this. Let's summarize this with AI so I don't bore you guys to tears and rip off this guy's entire article. Let's talk about this. Let's see. The text here that we're looking at, this mindmatters.ai, is this. This explains the relationship between information, entropy, and probability, and how it relates to the size of our minds. It discusses how information is linked to entropy and probability, and how our ability to generate meaningful text requires a large amount of mutual information. The concept of dependence is also explored, suggesting that our minds may be even bigger than the universe and all the multiverses combined. The article here ultimately highlights that measuring the mind in terms of information shows it to be larger than the universe. Well, so which is it, right? Again, philosophically, you can look at this two ways. Is the human brain really the most complex object in the universe? Very human-centric, like I said, kind of wrong-headed. I kind of agree with that. But then also, could our minds be bigger than the multiverse here as well? And I think the second part, I think there's legs to this, in my opinion, because, of course, the way you look at the ideas and how we consider we're sort of idea generators, even, dare we say, within our own black box of the meat suit, large language models that can infinitely create content, given enough time and, let's say you're well fed, you're well rested, and you're feeling creative. I mean, you could probably create endless content sort of in that space without having any obstructions, any having to go to work and any of that stuff. Let's say being creative and generating great stories and great ideas was your job, then you could probably do this, having, of course, the inspiration to do it endlessly, literally endlessly. And let's snap in to this let's say transhumanist bit where we're talking about maybe living forever. Let's say they robotized you and fit you in like car parts, new arms and new legs and new lungs and new heart and all the rest of that, and you're living for thousands and thousands of years being endlessly creative. Let's say still with your current consciousness. They didn't find a way to zap that out of you or something. But you get what I mean, is that it does seem like, because we can generate so much information and so many ideas, it does seem like this is possible, that our minds are bigger than everything. And so we have of course a contradiction here, but also we have this situation happening where it's philosophically difficult, because the beginnings and endings and how big all of this stuff really gets. Because look, some people suggest still that's where there's a firmament and the space is fake, and there's some of the rest of this stuff. And look, I'm not crapping on those ideas. I'm just saying some people believe this stuff. Some people believe space is fake and the universe, space is real and the universe is infinite, and all the rest, and or not, or something to that degree. Whatever. A lot of belief systems and a lot of ways to look at everything, and all the conspiracies involved, but then and all the normie stuff involved as well. Again, fractured realities and being able to imagine these things into existence themselves. And it seems like this is what we're really built to do. So not just pattern recognition experts, as we've talked about in the past, as the human mind being sort of very capable of this, but then also not just recognizing these patterns, also being able to create new lines of code, basically, or ideas or text or whatever you want to call it. Let's say specific art, if you're a painter, something like this. I mean, if you're eternally inspired, you could eternally paint amazing things that probably have never been done before. And that in and of itself is sort of this fractal of creation, this fractal of beginnings and endings within us and our mind. And so it does start to really beg the question here, at least philosophically, where we sort of sit in the large spectrum of this. And I don't know, as usual, way beyond my pay scale here. I'm not pretending I know any of these things, but philosophically, it is fun to think about where we kind of sit in that larger aspect of these conversations. But and also the other theme that kind of came to mind when I was thinking about this, and as you guys know, I always joke that all of my esoteric knowledge comes from Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, and it's partially true. Back to the 80s, back to that amazing garage sale I told you guys about, where I bought those cool D&D books in like 1988 or whatever it was with 25 cents a piece, and they were these old kind of worn in. I still have the player's handbook here at the house. The rest of them fell apart or got destroyed over the years, but this one's in terrible shape. But it's amazing that I still have it, and it was 25 cents at a garage sale. And yes, indeed, it is sort of the beginning into this esoteric sort of vision or knowledge, or again, stories of the fractal mind. And in that case, back to D&D for a sec. It's a place called the Far Realm, and we've talked about this a time or two in the past on the show, but it is a place beyond all of existence itself, meaning that it's beyond the place where ideas even exist, kind of a place where nothing is formed yet, amorphous masses, things like this, things that are maybe matter that hasn't been created as yet, maybe proto-ideas, things like this kind of floating around. I'll read it from here. So this is straight from dndbeyond.com. The link's going to be in the description down below. Little is known about the Far Realm, and Dungeons & Dragons is a place that exists beyond known reality. It is also the home and birthplace of all manner of eldritch horrors, including patrons that may preside over great old one warlocks. Bits and pieces of information regarding the Far Realm can be found in D&D's various editions. Here's a close look at what may be the game's most nightmarish setting, and there's some interesting stuff here. So we'll talk about this tonight as we go, but it's basically a space beyond all imagination, a place where there are no ideas formed yet. It's sort of formless in that aspect, and we haven't really, let's say, broached it with the human mind. It's beyond that space. Now, of course, go back to the idea of that romantic idea of beginnings and endings. Then we have this concept of sort of a break in the chain, a break in the fractal chain of the mind itself, and even into the multiversal cosmos that we are constantly and continually generating. Real? No. Somewhere in between? I don't really know. But where do you sit in this philosophical construct? Meaning, specifically, is the human brain really the most complex object in the universe? Or is that beyond absurd in your mind? Because to me, it seems like it's the wrong question to be asking. But it is a philosophical construct that is worth considering here. But then the second part is this goes even far larger than that. Could our minds be bigger than even a multiverse? And of course, fractally beyond that. What is a fractal of a multiverse? And does it end in any part of that chain, any part of the chain of connection, including and up to this spot in Dungeons & Dragons, again, a fictional place, but beyond the reach of human minds and ideas, called the Far Realm? Is that the break in this fractal chain, at least philosophically? Like I said, we're combining ideas as we usually do, but just kind of thinking of the cosmos in terms of not just what may be out there in terms of, let's say, the cold, dark void, but also how it affects the human aspect of the larger concept of creating multiverses with the mind itself. I don't really know. As you know, I'm not here trying to preach to anybody and tell you anything and make you believe some weird thing and send you a robe in the mail to join the cult. No. You stay in whatever culture you're in, and just pop in here once in a while and listen to some of these wild conversations, because there's a lot of ideas that flow through here. But what do you think? I think there's a lot to consider, and of course, in the terms of the fractal mindscape, I'm calling this an elusive fractal beginning, because of course it seems to me like this version of D&D, the Far Realm itself, may be that fractal beginning, or sort of a break in that chain. Is that possible? Or do you think that it's just, again, sort of endlessly fractal, sort of like the Ouroboros, that whole bit, the snake eating its tail? And of course, where do we sit in that space? And we could take it anywhere you want, of course, because that's exactly the point of these conversations. I begin it. Hopefully, we finish it with some amazing ideas, and that's what's happening. That's what's exactly on my mind tonight. I hope everybody's doing well. What do you know about this? Big, small, fractal, somewhere in between? And is there a break in that chain? Is it possible that not only is the human brain the most complex object in the universe, but also it's greater than the multiverse itself? Of course, considering, let's say, the output of creation. I don't know. It seems very human-centric, like I said. Sometimes even a little bit laughable when you consider that, but also maybe not. But beyond the mindscape, I'm calling this an elusive fractal beginning. But two things exist. Two things can exist at the same time philosophically, of course. Is the human brain really the most complex object in the universe, number one? Number two, could our minds be bigger than even a multiverse? So which is which? Can these things exist simultaneously? And is this just all philosophical nonsense?